This is such a great honor and a privilege. I'm really delighted to be with you here today. Thank you all very much for this honor. I'm a marine ecologist and an environmental scientist. My work focuses on the ways in which people can live in harmony with nature and how we can be better stewards of creation. I work at the intersection between climate change, the ocean, biodiversity, and human well-being. And I try to understand how we can achieve sustainable development that is economically feasible, ecologically sound, and socially just and equitable. Listening to these various presentations, I'm reflecting on how useful I have found Donald Stokes's framing of different kinds of science. I think it's quite insightful. He describes the commonly used basic and applied science framing, defining basic science as research that has a sole focus on advancing fundamental knowledge with no consideration for utility, but also applied science as using existing knowledge, but applying it to a new situation. He goes on to describe a third category of science that he calls use-inspired science, which is creating new knowledge that is immediately useful to society. In contrast to basic science, which is, it might be, and often is, eventually useful, but that's not part of the reason for doing it. So his use-inspired science really focuses on advancing intellectual frontiers in a way that also focuses on creating solutions. I began my career doing basic ecological science, understanding how natural ecosystems work. For example, why we see differences in the number of species in different parts of the world, and understanding how they work, understanding the role of predation, competition, herbivory, for example, in determining how abundant, where they live, how diverse different communities are. But as I began to see dramatic changes in the coastal marine ecosystems I was studying, it became crystal clear that we were soon going to lose our coral reefs, kelp forests, mangrove systems, and much more, plus all of the benefits that they provide to people if something did change. And so over time, I began more and more to do what Donald Stokes calls use-inspired science. And most of my work today focuses on solutions, on figuring out how people can use nature without using it up, but especially how to use the ocean without using it up. And I'm sort of hearing echoes of Eric Lander's comments about building community around doing things like that, and also focusing on science in service to society. When I was president of the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, in 1997, I gave my presidential address on the concept of the social contract that science has with society and what our obligations are to society. So my colleagues and I work now on producing new knowledge, assessing existing knowledge, and communicating effectively to a range of audiences from the public to global leaders. And this focus on communicating science has led me to co-found a number of organizations that help scientists learn how to become more effective in sharing their science with lay audiences, to do what I call be bilingual. We need to teach scientists to speak the language of science, but also to speak the language of lay people, so that they can benefit from what we are learning and we can understand what they care about and what they know. I bring an ecological and holistic perspective to many interdisciplinary collaborations, but I always think about human natural systems as complex adaptive systems. For example, one of the things that I'm working on is the intersection between climate change and the ocean. And we recently released a report that suggests that as we think about the importance of reducing carbon emissions the ocean has been pretty much out of sight, out of mind. And yet I oversaw a new analysis that went through all the different ocean-based opportunities for mitigating climate change. And we concluded that it's possible to get as much as 21%, 1/5 of the reductions in carbon emissions that are needed to get us to the 1.5 degree target by 2050. So 1/5 is a heck of a lot that has not even been on the table. This is focusing on renewable energy from the sea, decarbonizing shipping, protecting blue carbon ecosystems like mangrove salt marshes, seagrass beds, shifting diets to include more protein from the ocean and less animal protein from land, and carbon storage in the seabed. So that's just one example of how we can be smarter and better about using natural systems to help solve some of our problems. A second example is with food security. Currently, 3 billion people depend on seafood for their sole or their primary source of protein. When I was the administrator of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and the Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere in the first term of the Obama administration, we saw a remarkable turnaround in our fisheries. After decades and decades of overfishing, we have now flipped that story and have very sustainable fisheries because we were able to recover, stop overfishing, recover depleted stocks, and now they are much, much more abundant. And so we can get much more seafood, but also those fish and other ocean animals are operating in the context of their own ecosystems. So some recent analyses suggest that we could actually get 6 times more food from the ocean than we do now, if in fact we would end overfishing globally. Not an easy thing to do, but possible. We've shown it is possible, and we have many insights into how to do it. But 6 times more seafood would help hugely with the food security issue. So those are just 2 quick examples of some of the things that we're working on that are at this intersection between climate, the ocean, biodiversity, and human well-being. I've come to realize that what our narratives are about what we do is also important. And in this regard, I think it's useful to reflect on the fact that for most of human history, the ocean has been thought of as being so immense, so bountiful, so resilient, that it was simply too big to fail. That's sort of our concept of the ocean. We've seen in the last few decades how that narrative is absolutely false. And we're seeing problem after problem after problem in the ocean, from collapsing fisheries to bleached coral reefs to disgusting plastic pollution and more. And that is leading many people to conclude the ocean is actually so messed up. There are so many problems. The drivers are so intransigent that the ocean is now too big to fix. I don't think either of those is true. I think that there is a new narrative that is emerging that I am working actively to promote, inspired in part by the amazing turns around that I have seen in many different systems around the world. They're not at the scale that we need, they're not at the pace that we need, but new science and new knowledge is driving new solutions. And I think that we are beginning to realize that the ocean is so central to our own health, prosperity, and well-being that it's simply too big to ignore. And so bringing science to the fore, helping it be engaged with communities, with policymakers, with global leaders in creating and then implementing solutions is very much a path to achieving this new vision of a planet more in balance and more respectful of the people that have the least in this world and to whom we owe obligations. So I'm delighted that I've had some conversations with Marcello about a potential workshop around the ocean. I think that's very timely. There's a lot of new knowledge and the timing couldn't be better. So thank you again for this honor, and I look forward to working with all of you.